Today is June 25th, 2013. We're on the campus of Ball State University in the studio of WIPB TV. And today I'm talking with one of our World War II veterans, Jack Isenbarger. Jack, can you tell us where you were born and what year?
I was born in La Crosse, Indiana, which is LaPorte County in northern Indiana, 1923.
And when you grew up as a child through the Depression. And
very much so.
And as the 30s began to come to a close, were you aware of maybe the war clouds in Europe and in Asia?
Yes, somewhat, because at that time they had invaded maybe Poland. I don't recall which was the first one. And we were gearing up here in Muncie for war work. So I think as juniors, seniors in high school, we knew what was coming.
How did you feel? Were you anxious about that?
I guess not. I had a scholarship to go to college, and I think at that time I was more interested in getting settled and don't recall, well, we followed it, of course, on the radio, but hadn't progressed enough really to get our attention, which is not having, we probably didn't have any, we didn't have any family or close friends that were already there or had problems, which began to come home maybe a year or so later. So, see, our deal where I was DePaul University, and they said if you will finish the semester, I mean, if you want to finish the semester, then you'll go in what they call the Enlisted Reserve Corps. Okay, well, we want to finish, so we said okay, so we signed up. And basically that was basic training in the infantry, which was fine. We were all young and healthy, so, you know, and it was, our group was all from different colleges.
And this, so you're going to college and also undergoing some form of military training?
No.
You finished your schooling that semester and then went off?
Right, that was the deal.
Okay.
See, we were ready, I had probably gone into draft, but they said if you want to finish, and they did the same thing with the Navy boys. Most of them went in what they call V5 or V7. V7, I think, was deck officers, V5 was Navy Air Force.
And how would you describe your basic training and your training? Was it adequate?
Oh yes, because in that period of time, you know, it was almost 6 days a week. Not every week. We usually had the weekends off, but our TAC officers, which were the commissioned officers doing the training, most of them, not all, but most of them had already been in combat. So they were back teaching what they did and what didn't work and so forth in the field. It was very thorough, and they were tough. I mean, there was no kidding around. We knew what we were going to end up with, so we paid attention, or at least most of us paid attention. But I'll answer your question, Dirk. It was very thorough and well done by people who knew what they were talking about.
You were assigned to the 104th Division, the Timberwolf?
Yes. That was after the short brief in Fordham on this engineering program, which they just dropped it, period, all over the country. What was happening, of course, was they needed replacements, and a lot of people who were in the service had gone overseas, so they were filling up these divisions, which in this case was the 104th.
Were you with the division when Major General Terry de la Mesa Allen was assigned as commanding general?
Right. He had come in, I think, when they were still in Oregon, and then went all through maneuvers in the desert. And yes, Terry Allen was our commanding general, and he had been in Europe.
He had previously commanded the Big Red One, the 1st
Right.
Infantry Division throughout North Africa and Sicily.
I think it was Kasserine Pass, wasn't it? I can't recall just exactly where they had the big. Well, we actually got beat, I think.
Yeah, but he had a bit of a reputation.
Oh yeah,
and a bit of a legend. What were your impressions of him?
Well, of course, we didn't see him that often, but of course he was a big ally of night fighting, and we did an awful lot of combat at night. I wouldn't say 50%, but I was just reading my book. We have a regimental history, and time and again it refers to the 1st Battalion or 2nd Battalion getting ready for a night fight or a night attack on a certain town, or so. But he was good. He had very good his regimental, his artillery head was great, and the battalion commanders I knew, which not personally, but knew of them and were with them, were very seasoned, and some of them had come up through the ranks, and we had a couple West Pointers and so forth. But we had a pretty good outfit. They had trained us quite a while. In fact, a bunch of college boys coming in with these guys that had been there for a couple of years. We weren't the most popular for a while, but we integrated in and said work. And once you got in, of course, we got in combat. It was great. Everybody helped everybody else, and we got along. Everybody got along.
I did some research prior to our interview here, and reading up on Allen emphasized night attack as a way to reduce casualties. And one of the other quotes was that Terry Allen probably cared too much for his soldiers. Do you think, you didn't have contact with the commanding general, but
No.
You mentioned your commanders, your officers that you had contact with. Did you feel that sense of care and concern about the foot soldiers?
Oh, yes, I think so. In just reviewing some of the things the other day, as I say, in this legend that we have, he was, I think, very fair, and say we're going to take Weichweiler tonight or whatever the town would be. If 1st Battalion's going to do it, we'll have the 2nd in reserve. Well, maybe the next one that would be opposite. It kind of depended on the sector, and he was pretty well up on who the commanding officers were of the particular regiment, even down the company. So I always thought that he knew his officer cadre pretty well, and who could do better and who might not do so good. So, but as far as any other than that, you hit it. The night training, and he was strict on discipline. If you're going on pass, tie, wear your uniform correctly, and so forth. But
you talked about night attacks. How would you train for those? How did you train for those in Oregon?
Well, I wasn't with them in Oregon.
Okay.
A bunch of us was assigned in Colorado, Camp Carson, Colorado Springs. Well, they set up what they call problems, and they had referees. What the white band was this, and the red band was the enemy. And we actually we didn't use line of ammunition all the time, but just practiced, I guess you would say, what it's going to like. What if we could? And then, of course, they would have some artillery, and so it was pretty realistic. And it was up in the hills. Some of that was in the hills around Colorado. But I don't suspect that we really knew what it was going to be until we got over there. Because you didn't have machine pistols firing at you.
That realism, that immediacy that there is an enemy out there shooting at you. Your baptism of fire for your unit, the 104th, came with the Canadian First Army.
Right. We were what they call the Fusiliers from Canadian. They were having a little trouble in Belgium, and that's where we took over for them, and when they were reassigned someplace. But we were at the Canadian First for, well, I expect 2 or 3 weeks in Belgium, and then of course Holland. But I never saw any of them, many of them.
Yeah. And then shortly thereafter, you were reassigned to take over east of Aachen after its capture.
Aachen-Durham sector, right? That's where the division was.
Mm-hmm. I believe that was November of 1944.
That'd been about right. See, we went in action around the 1st of October, a little before, first into Belgium. Not very long in Belgium, and then into Holland, and from Holland to Germany. But what would you say?
Well, I was trying to get at, what were as a green soldier, as a young soldier, what were your first impressions of battle?
Well, the very first night we were in combat, our platoon officer called us, our platoon together, which I don't recall how many we had in those days, but anyway, and said, well, we're going to walk through the German army tonight. I mean, several of us later years thought, my God, that man, but that's exactly what he said. And it didn't work out that way. But the funny story about that, we did, I guess, do a little combat, but then we set up in a farmland, in a farmyard. And at night, dug holes, got in, so forth and so on. And we had some artillery fire coming in because we had an FO, a field artillery officer, directing fire, but it wasn't that bad. But anyway, come the daylight, we looked around. Here was a machine gun pointed at us. We had a mortar pointing it over here, our own guys. I mean, it was, you know, it was almost ridiculous. But we got that corrected real quick. But that was my first indication of what we're going to get into here pretty soon.
So confusion, maybe.
Yeah, it was confusion. In fact, that first night, that same lieutenant was hit, and I think our platoon sergeant got hit in the eye because we didn't have a officer for, oh gosh, 3-4 weeks.
And that was in your heavy weapons platoon?
Well, I was in the light weapons.
Oh, light weapons.
Yeah.
Okay.
Heavy weapons actually is in artillery.
Okay.
Ours was 60 meter. That's 90 meter, the big ones.
Okay. And you had machine guns in your?
Yeah, we had machine gun, 3 machine gun squads and 2 mortar squads.
Okay.
At least in our company, you know, it could be different, but that's we were set up. So there's 2 rifle platoons, a weapons platoon, which makes 3 for the company. Then there's the service company and what do they call it, the people that take care of, I'm trying to think of the word you use.
Oh, the clerical or?
Well, yeah, support system,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
In the light weapons platoon, the weapons platoon you were in, how far back off, say, the rifle line would you be?
Well, of course, it would kind of depend on how they were doing. Was just referencing something yesterday in this history, and it was talking about, see, rifle. They would always send out scouts. Rifle platoon send out scouts, and they had run into heavy duty all of a sudden that they didn't know was there, and of course they had to drop by, and it was saying how they repositioned machine guns and mortars quickly to counteract what they were running into, hoping not to hit our people. But I suspect, depending on how they got along, 50 yards maybe. There again, if we were to fire, we had to know that our guys were out of the way.
You had limited range on those 60 millimeters.
Yeah, I can't remember. Yeah, it wasn't too far. I just don't recall what the range was. When I play golf now, I think, now I ought to know how to 100 yards, 50 yards, 25, but I don't know.
It didn't stay from your Army time.
It wasn't like a machine gun. You know, you could just start firing a machine gun and hoping you'd hit something.
Yeah. And the mortars had the advantage of being able to arc up
Right.
over perhaps defensive cover that the enemy may
Sure,
have had.
yeah. And if you know, we had sights, of course, and your sights told you how many yards, how many yards you want to shoot, and you set your gun at that level. And if you knew where which you often didn't, if you knew where the enemy was, whatever it might be, why, you know, you could be pretty successful. And a lot of times we'd have riflemen calling fire, you know, maybe down on their stomach, seeing us back there, and they'd, with their hand gesture and that type thing, it was fairly successful. But we were lucky not to be on the very front. I mean, like one attack we made when a good friend of mine, which I saw later after the war, he said, we surrendered out the back door while you guys were coming in the front door. And he did. They had taken them. It was a big factory, so they were probably, you know, 50 yards from the front back. And they had taken they thought the factory, but they got captured. And, I remember, because we stayed all night there, I can remember getting under a table. We were getting artillery fire. But
and so you were close enough that you could be subjected to enemy small arms fire.
Oh yeah, very much so.
Were you ever, or did you ever feel like you were in a sniper scope?
Well, I can give you one pretty good example. We were getting a lot of fire from this trenches when I started to do this, and we'd get fire here, we'd get fire over here, and it was because, oh, I know, we had you were trained to build a parapet in front of your hole with whatever your dirge came up, billets. So if you, and anyway, these bullets were hitting the parapet, so we were getting a little nervous. Anyway, we thought, what in the hell is going on? Making a long story short, the next morning we find there was 2 Krauts with machine pistols, and they'd run over here and fire, then they'd run over here and fire, and everybody, including our captain, thought that there probably was maybe a squad of Krauts up there, but it wasn't. It was just, they could lay those things flat on the top of a trench, and it would just, you know, they're coming in like that into your. But that's kind of scary.
Yeah.
I suppose. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I think maybe I said that in one of your interviews. What probably really got our attention more was when the 2 aidmen we had, one was shot and one was killed, and they had big red crosses on their helmet. They were running. And just as the one dove in the hole, I think he was the one that got killed. The other one was wounded, and quite frankly, he was evacuated, but I don't know whatever happened to him. This is the time, I think I told you or somebody, we were getting fire from this hedgerow. And what are we going to do? Well, let's get a tank up here. So we got and here came this British tank. You could always tell them because they had their tea kettles pounding along the side, and they just rattled like, and so here they come, and they fired several blasts in this hedgerow, and then started to back out. And the sergeant and myself would say, hey, what are you guys going? It was tea time. And that's the truth. They backed out. Fortunately, we captured the kid the next day, and he was about 17 years old. He was doing all this trouble, dug in under this hedgerow. But anyway, they said, yeah, we got to go tea time now.
But after your medics, the 2 medics got hit, did that change your attitudes?
Yeah. It kind of hardens you a little bit. And yeah, I suspect if I had my weapon and had in a particular case and had it with somebody at me, I would have shot him. I would have killed him.
Did you find that after a battle, did you feel an adrenaline letdown and You had clearer thinking?
I think once you heard what was really successful, who had been hit, who, or, you know, how about second platoon, how about Company B, so forth. Yes, but we were in the line for quite a while before we ever got back showers and some clean clothes. But so were a lot of other people, you know. As I have said, so I was so lucky, and I was just, it was just, you get people killed in front of you and back of you and the side of you, and just wonder. You know, the day I was hit, two of them, one was here and one was two ammo bearers. One fellow was 36 years old and had a son in the Air Force flying. Here he is. He was a replacement. We'd just gotten him. When we did pull back for a day or after an attack, we would usually get, not always, but we'd get replacements in. And
what was the quality of the guys that
oh,
came?
they were pretty well trained. They had just come out of basic, most of them. And if you had a good sergeant, if you had good squad leaders, they could get them in shape pretty good. But
you said you had to take on some responsibility because early on you had
yeah,
officers.
we lost our section sergeant. I can't think. I remember his name was Samchuk. And I think I ran the squad for a couple of weeks, maybe. I don't recall what. We started to lose, you know, here and there, and everybody just kind of pitched in, and we had some other sergeants, some other more experienced sergeants that if they were for our platoon, they would send them into the weapons platoon. But yes, you had to kind of figure things out yourself. And
What was your rank at that time?
PFC.
And you just had to pick up the responsibility?
Yeah. See, our squad sergeants were buck sergeants, that's 3 stripes. And the tech sergeant was platoon sergeant. Staff, well, we didn't have I don't think we had a staff, no. But, well, of course, October, November, you really didn't have, you had a lot of casualties, but you didn't have people being promoted like later on. I mean, the fellow that was with me, I think he came out of tech sergeant, and because we just lost a lot of people, he went right all the way to Russia. But it was getting, you know, and even later on, we could tell it was getting lean because we weren't getting replacements. They just couldn't get them there fast enough. But you just kind of did what you had to do and hope for the best.
So manpower became an issue. Was it a mixed blessing for you as far as getting a promotion?
No.
You were ready for it?
Yeah, I didn't care one way or the other, but of course, after I got hit, well, that was the end of a war for me.
Yeah.
And as I said, we just had some narrow escapes, and I was very, very fortunate.
Would you mind talking to us about that attack on Indon on December 11th when you were injured?
Well, no, not a bit. We, I forget which battalion took Indon, and that was, we'd been pretty busy for a few days, and so everybody got, well, they said for so long they wouldn't let us get in houses. But basically because the Germans were there anyway, and they were afraid of booby traps and stuff, but that kind of subsided. And as we took more ground and more towns, and we always went in the basement. And of course, you drop in the basement and a lot of their stuff was still there. But anyway, Indon, I thought my father wrote me one time and said that some paper had said Indian Germany had been hit with more artillery than anything during that war. Now, I don't know about that. I do know that when we went in the basement, the house was there, and when we walked out, we just opened the door and it was all daylight. So we did catch a lot of fire. We tried, yes, let's see. 2nd Battalion tried to take this little town of Pier, north, I don't know which, but and they got kicked out. So, because we were in Indian maybe 3-4 days, we were. So that's when they announced that 6 o'clock the next morning we were attacking Pier and Schophoven, which was 2 little German towns. And of course, the thing that really scared you was open territory. You know, just acres of open territory in some places. And it was dark. It was getting light, but it was dark. And we started out in pretty good shape. We did catch a lot of fire to start with. But then all of a sudden, we could tell things weren't going so well ahead. And I saw this tank, maybe 200-300 yards ahead, because there was some raised ground and you could see him coming up and I could see him turn. And I didn't remember a tree, but I told the guys, there were maybe 4 of us, I said, hit the hole because there's a great big shell crater. And we did. Well, there was a tree about the size of that deal, and all he did was detonate a shell into the top of it, and of course, shrapneled up. And we got 2 ammo bearers. One guy had a broken leg. I got hit, and there was another fellow there I just don't recall. But that was a rough day because we had to, and later, 2 days later, I guess, it took them that long to take the town.
Well, I did some research, and let me see. German radio broadcast said of the battle that the battle for Indian was, quote, most terrible and ferocious battle in the history of all wars.
That must be what my father was talking about.
Would you say in your time in the line that it was the toughest battle you were in?
No, I wouldn't, because evidently I think the 2nd Battalion finally took the town before we went in. And the minute we went in, we went, as I said, to this house and got in the basement. And outside of catching a lot of artillery fire, we meaning our platoon or maybe even our company, wasn't subject. In fact, I remember having a hot meal for the first time in 2 or 3 weeks. But in rereading the other day some of the stuff in our, as I say, in our regiment history, it's very descriptive in there what it was to take Indian. But we didn't know at the time. It was over the time we got there, I guess.
Yeah, and that maybe speaks to the kind of fragmented nature of battle.
Oh, sure.
That it may have been easy for you and hell for the guys in the next company.
No question about it.
Yeah.
And particularly if you for instance, riflemen ran up against pillboxes or ducking Germans and just had to lie there in their stomach with a rifle and grenades. Where we would catch it would be from light artillery. They knew we were there. Maybe there were some of our machine gun squads here and a couple mortars. If they saw us, well, then we might catch a little more than the riflemen would. But basically, they took the brunt. Well, we had a lot of casualties, like every division.
Yeah. Your division had a pretty good reputation.
Yeah, we did, particularly after they got going and further into Germany.
Omar Bradley, and this was after you were hit, but after the 104th took Cologne, Germany,
Right.
he turned to Terry Allen, your division commander, and said, Terry, I think the 104th is as good as the 1st and the 9th as far as assault divisions in the ETO.
I heard about, see, we were headed for Cologne and had to cross the Ruhr River, and our objective was Cologne.
Can you tell me about, from Aachen to the Ruhr River, there was a Siegfried line.
Right.
Can you talk to us about cracking the Siegfried line?
I really can't, because I remember we were not bivouac, but we were dug in a is it the Hurtgen Forest?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where it was. And Siegfried was not in our sector, not in the regiment sector, I should say. I don't recall whether the other regiments were, so I never saw it.
Okay.
I'm sure we walked through it.
Yeah, maybe after the other regiments.
Yeah, after it was taken.
But the Hurtgen Forest itself was another
Yeah,
meat grinder.
that was a meat grinder. I can remember we put tree trunks over it, you know, and I can dirt falling down in a hole, and this one guy just bitched and moaned all the time because he wasn't getting hit, he was just getting dirty. But yeah, that was kind of grubby in the Hurtgen.
Yeah, they called it the Hurtgen.
Hurtgen.
Yeah, and it was, many divisions went into that forest and came out all battered.
I think that was on our way to Eschweiler, I think. Mm-hmm. I just, after so many years, and I was reviewing the history, and it's not real deep. It's not real detailed.
Yeah,
just tells you about battles, this town, that town, what the first was doing, what the second was doing, and so forth. And I'm sure as a company commander or something, you probably would recall a lot more.
What about the morale of the men in your platoon and the platoons around you after getting to the Ruhr River? What would you say their morale was like?
Well, of course, I hadn't been hit before. The thing I recall most was we knew we had to cross the river. We had never crossed the river yet. And there was a lot of anxiety. And I was probably as anxious as any of them, because I just could, look across and you knew what you were up against. Because they knew, that was the thing about fighting the Germans. They knew you were coming because they'd been there before. It got funny. Particularly, I can remember going in Eschweiler, Germany. It was Thanksgiving, and we went in the house, and I kid you not, the stove was still warm. The people had left that quick.
What kind of soldier was the average German soldier?
Well, it's kind of a mixed bag. You know the SS. Well, if you run into there, the Panzer Division, you're in big trouble. Now the Volks, what would they call them? The Wehrmacht.
Volkssturm, and then the Wehrmacht was the regular.
Wehrmacht was the old infantry, kind of they were, if they thought, at least in my opinion, if they thought they were beat, they would give up. Action. In fact, I just was reading the other day that the SS and the Hitler Youth probably caused more trouble than the regular army. The regular army guys, the Wehrmacht basically against you. Well, there's a lot of stories about, during the Bulge they called a truce and let everybody pick up their wounded and get settled down again. But I wasn't that close to them. One story, as we would take prisoners, the deal was you're always supposed to wave them back, because we had personnel back there that would collect them and take them to prison camp. Well, they all carried Lugers. I mean, and I can remember this one, I said something again, Luger. Well, he didn't have one. And this guy said, what if he had one and he just picked it up and shot you? I said, I never thought about that. But the ones that we had that I had anything to do with, they gave up. They'd always throw the helmet and their weapon down first. You've seen it in pictures probably, but the boys that had to put up with the SS and, some of the, as a matter of fact, when I was in the hospital in Camp Carson, we had the African Corps prisoners there taking care of the gardens and sweeping up, and that was, boy, they were 6'4", 6'3", maybe weighed 250, and they all wore little shorts. And well, you probably read about the Africa Corps.
Oh yeah, regular Army, but they were darn good.
Yeah.
I'm checking my notes here. I'm sorry, Jack. After your injury, you well, tell us a little bit about the medical care that you received.
Well, that was early in the morning, and as I say, we had, including the dead fellows, we probably had another half. When I say we, I mean the outfit platoon, the company probably had a dozen, because I remember looking and we would wave and thought, well, I got a bad leg or do something. But it was very good. They were having a lot of trouble. So you just really couldn't go out and get anybody. As you read, this little town of Pierre, it took them, I think, 2 days to capture it. 2 days after I'm talking about. But once it dark, then the litter bearers came out, and some of our own guys that were okay. In fact, they helped me get on the litter and go to they call it a battalion aid station. That's your first drop, at least it was then. And you're diagnosed with, what's your trouble, and if they did. And they operated on my leg there that night. And then we were shipped up to Orly Airport in France to go to and eventually airlifted to England. That must have been 3 or 4 days. I can always remember because I was on those stretchers, and they're not very comfortable after about the 3rd or 4th day, but they put a tag on your ankle, like it gets morphine 4 hours or whatever it might be. Oh, finally they kept putting, I figured out what they were doing every time so I just reached down and pulled the tag off. Because they couldn't sleep, they gave me sticky with a needle. So that was okay. Anyway, then I had to be operated on again in England because they hadn't gotten all the stuff out of my leg. But other than that, well, I got along fine. Well, I was there about 3 months, a little short of 3 months. Yeah, well, almost 4 months, really.
When were you declared fit for service?
Must have been the latter part of March. So I was there January, February, and part of March, yeah. We got there 15th of December. In fact, I was in the dorm, in the ward already when these kids kept coming in talking about the bulge. Did you read about the 106th Infantry Division? See, they came, I think, right out of Atterbury, right into the bulge.
They got dissolved.
Oh.
Yeah.
And that was our first indication anything like that was going on.
When you made your recovery, what were you told? What was the next option for you?
Well, I was, I guess, pretty well along in recovery. I can't recall who came around, I suppose. Anyway, they want to know if I want to go get a commission. And I said, well, I guess so.
And you would have been an officer.
Yeah. So they sent us to France. Anybody that's traveled France will know Fontainebleau. That's where I had our training. And most of us were infantry, well, not all, but quite a few combat related. And it wasn't like Benning, which was a hard 90 days. This was about 60 days of review, infantry tactics, da-da-da-da-da-da. And, you know, we suddenly realized that we weren't finished in Japan yet. And I can remember sitting there talking, and obviously that was next. They just needed line officers. But anyway, we were commissioned and sent back to the States. Got 45. Well, the war ended 3 days out of New York. There again, very lucky. So instead of 30, we had 45 days. And my division, of course, I was hoping that some people said, well, you'll never be assigned to your old outfit. Well, I can always try. In the meantime, they had already been shipped to the States and was out in Oregon again, getting ready to go to Japan. And of course, it was over. But if you had enough points to get out, after that, you left, but I didn't have enough points, so I went down to Fort McClellan, Alabama, and trained, which was the RTC, which is Replacement Training Center, and trained troops for, that was Christmas, about 3 months.
So the war in Europe wound down, and then you were shipped back to New York? It ended in May of 45?
It wasn't May.
Yeah, May 8th.
Yeah, we were there. Yeah, it was over. Well, we weren't reassigned it to any outfit. It was well along and over by the time we were commissioned.
Mm-hmm. What, you probably had your own personal thoughts about going off and being part of the invasion of Japan. Did you or your classmates discuss that?
Oh, yes. We said Harry Truman on the boat coming home. Everyone to the last man say, well, Harry Truman saved our life. And he did. You've probably read stories the way the Japanese were training their citizens with pointed sticks and what to do, da-da-da-da. I mean, it was going to be, I forget what the toll was of our own troops, but it's hundreds of thousands. Yeah. But yeah, when we realized what was going on, why we were headed right. I mean, headed in the right direction. So, I don't know. You know, sometimes you maybe you take yourself too seriously, but I always thought these fellows that wrote books about being there, hell, I wouldn't have time to take my canteen out, let alone write what was going on. You know, I'm just worried about me and the guys I'm in charge.
Do you think, though, in the cases where the people have written the books about their time in combat, are these maybe folks a little towards the back, maybe not close to the firing lines?
Oh, maybe, but there's a lot of infantry guys did it. There's one right here in town. I can't think of his name right now, but fellow you've interviewed, Frank wrote one on these tank deals. Yeah. Well, I wouldn't want to have been in a tank. I mean, you know, it's as they wanted. Excuse me. Few times that I saw that many tanks, they always wanted to trade their 45s for carbines, because they said, if I got to come out of that tank, I want that carbine. I don't want that 45. So a lot of these infantry guys would scrounge a gun somewhere, but he had quite a successful. I don't even recall which after he was with who he was with.
He was in Patton's Third Army.
Third Army, okay. I enjoyed the book. In fact, my wife gave me the book for Christmas I guess it was 2 years ago now. And
He was attached to the 5th Infantry Division, and so
okay.
I asked him about working with infantry, and did he ever want to trade places?
Yeah.
And he said he'd rather be in the tank, but he had great admiration for the doughs, as he called them, the doughboys.
Yeah. Ground pounders.
Yeah.
That's what the paratroop boys, they were a bunch of. I was with several of them in the hospital, and we were always ground pounders.
Did you get along with those troops that you met in the hospital? Was there any rivalry between?
No. A lot of them was just, it had been so serious that you didn't. Maybe after they got like, of course I had a cast, and some of the guys would have casts on their legs or would go into town and maybe get a little fracas with like a British soldier or British, but other than that, I don't recall having any problems at all. As I say, when we started hearing about those things that during the bulge, that we were just thinking, my goodness, we'd have been, well, as a matter of information, the 104th was assigned, as I recall, a 3-division sector during the bulge. They didn't have anything to do with it. In fact, a friend of mine, as I said, went all the way through. He said, well, we trained and took showers and got replacements and got ready to go again. But they must have been quite a sector to try to cover.
Yeah, they had to extend the, I guess, coverage front of the divisions that weren't reassigned to handle the bulge. Yeah. And so the 104th took on more responsibility.
Right, and there were a couple others, but I don't recall what they were.
Yeah. Was there ever a time that when you were serving in the fall and winter of '44 that you noticed a decline in your morale of your troop?
No, I would say that the only time that I ever really remember your specific question, we were trying to take this town of Eschweiler, which is a pretty good sized town. I think I mentioned it getting in there on Thanksgiving. And as we understood, we found out later, our company, or maybe there were 2 or 3 companies, but our company in particular, was to make a attack in this draw. And this is like this, sheer sides, and just, I don't think there was water. And we started. Well, we got in the damn place, and there was a railroad trestle down, I don't recall how many, quite a ways, maybe 400 or 500 yards. Well, they had a machine gun, and my goodness, I mean, you just laid as flat as you could against the wall of the deal because they were just coming down the pike, the bullets. So we set the mortar up and we fired one shot and it was a dud. I thought, this gun, it went up as high as that wall and down. So we dropped another one in and we got the machine gun. Anyway, word started to come down, withdraw. We were getting hit right and left. And so we had to climb back up. Of course, it's easy going down, but coming back up the hill. And our commanding officer was standing at the top of the hill, shaking hands with every man. and helping them. and just said, "I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry, guys." But that's
He had his
that
orders.
they had to do. He had his orders. Yeah. And in the meantime, in fact, I was just reviewing, the battalion on the other side came in another way and took the town. And the whole idea was they thought a force was coming. We weren't the only ones, but there were other companies in the regiment doing the same thing. We just happened to be in this draw.
Yeah.
And in fact, it was, I guess, that was the worst I think I recall of being real. In fact, the word came down, drop your weapons and get out. Drop your weapons and get out. Well, they did. I guess we probably left them order. But anyway, the next day, there was 3 of us. And we had to go back and pick them up. But
did your appreciation or regard for your commander go up or down as a result of that?
Oh, up. Yeah. His name was Radlinsky. He was first lieutenant. We all thought, my God, I'm never going to make this guy a captain, which they finally did. And he retired. He was not a regular Army guy. But yes, we had him, and we had another first from Texas that was a very good executive officer. And he just had to do what he had to do.
Yeah, I guess you have your orders, and your unit must have drawn the short straw to get that terrain, and other units had better ground.
They may have been going through the woods, or who knows.
Yeah.
Funny thing, we had this machine gun. No, he was a mortar guy. Ollie Kaczynski. He weighed about 275 pounds, and he was from South Philadelphia, and just tougher than nails. And because he used to carry he'd carry the whole damn mortar on his shoulder. But anyway, we're walking, picking up these rifles and stuff, and there's a German officer lying there just like this. And he went up, put his foot on his stomach, and he went, shoo. He said, "Look at that guy, he even dies at attention."
That kind of humor?
Yeah.
Did that happen often?
Yeah, oh yeah. Oh goodness. Well, of course, I was a laughing stock of the squad for a couple days, because when they peeked out, I said, everything was gone on the top. Heard this noise. So I said, well, better check on that. I had a 45. So I did. I don't know. We must have had the stairs or some way to get up. But anyway, I got out there and I heard this noise and I fired. I shot a goat. This was a little typical farm with a fence all around the house, within the fence, and that was a goat.
But it was a German goat.
I suppose.
Yeah. So maybe it was a fifth column.
Yeah.
Was that attack then? Was that I wrote down darkest hour, I guess your most trying moment as a soldier that you felt at your lowest ebb?
I mean, the day I was hit?
That
in the draw.
Yeah.
I don't recall how many. Well, I do recall one. We had a little Indian guy that was the best machine gunner we had in the company, and he was killed. But he was right up there, practically on top of these guys. And I don't recall, but we had quite a few casualties that night. Maybe not deaths, but here again, it was at night, and I just don't remember how many. But I think probably, yes, that and the morning that I was hit. Anytime you had an open field, you knew you had problems. You've seen it in pictures, you've seen an attack going, and You know, when you hear fixed bayonets, you know, you're either going to have a problem or hope you don't.
More often than not.
Because, as I say, in Germany, and I think they were always waiting for you. As you, in our case, we kept, you know, when they broke out of St. Lo, they kept going and kept going. And yeah, they had times where they didn't go so fast, but you knew pretty well where they were, because then you occupied the same territory and the same houses and the same trenches, and just like artillery, or what they call them,
Pre-registered?
forwards, they're FOs, artillery FOs, because Germans are great for those churches with the steeples and so forth. They'd put their FOs up there because they could see and fire. Well, our guys did the same thing once we took the town or took whatever it was. So maybe from that standpoint, might have been for the staff to plan an attack, because they knew that's where they were. But
did you, in your guys in your rifle company, the 3 platoons, did you work out any special tactics to deal with German defenses that deviated from the training you
don't
received?
recall any. I don't recall. No, I don't. I'm sure probably particularly the rifle platoons may have, but I don't. It just seemed like we just moved all the time. And it was, you know, as I say, I think one time from October till I was December that we got clean clothes and showers. Now we did have hot meals occasionally we had a terrific supply sergeant. He really did. We couldn't stand him in the States, but he was really great. He got us first combat boots. Remember the combat boots? Well, I don't know where he got them, but he got them. And he would bring clean underwear and clean shirts and stuff. But, well, that answered your question.
When things would get low or you would get low, what sustained you? What kept you motivated?
I suppose just talking to the other guys and just wondering. I had an ammo bearer named Salvador Guageni, and he worked for the post office in Kansas City. He'd been drafted. And anytime we got in a house or got in a big enough hole or a basement, everybody would take off their rifle belt and maybe clean their whatever. He'd go over and sit in the corner, overcoat on, whole deal there, and light a cigar. We'd say, we call him Sal. He said, Sal, why don't you get a little more comfortable? Well, he was comfortable. He just having his cigar, and didn't wash too many times. But I don't know that name till I die. Salvador Guageni. He passed away 2 years ago, because he attended all the 104th Division reunions. And somebody had seen him at one and said he had retired from the post office. He'd been there, 40 years or whatever. I'm sure they found, they saw a lot of us as characters too.
One of the historians that I've read, McPherson, wrote on the Civil War, and he wrote about motivation. And the title of his book is "For Cause or for Comrades," and he boiled it down to the men would enlist for a cause, and then the sustaining or battle motivation was the comrades, the men around them. Can you talk to us about the bonds you formed?
Well, I think you mentioned the 2 aide men that were injured and one was killed. I think probably going in early as we were at that point, that probably buoyed us up for a good while. other than that, you would hear about so-and-so got it yesterday or somebody did so forth. But you couldn't get too wrapped up because you know you had to do your job. And I just don't recall ever really getting to the point where, you know, I was just worried sick that something was going to happen. I mean, if it did, I guess. And so the guy said, "Are you ever scared?" And I said, "All the time." And we had some jovial guys, like the big fat guy I was telling you about, and people like that. And we had a sergeant from Kentucky that you hardly could understand him, but he was just a good old boy. And what was it he said? Well, he always had some saying about from the Kentucky hills, and guys like that. But and you had a lot of fellows that had been in school and you'd been drafted or had joined, and you certainly had a mix of as Mother used to say, humanity. You had a mix of humanity in every state in the Union. In fact, I was just going down a roster. In fact, it's in that back of that, back of a book at home. I couldn't find, I think I only found one person from Indiana in our regiment. All over, well, just they were.
Yeah. And when the replacements came in after casualties started to mount, did you feel detached from them?
No. The best thing you could do was start to tell them what we're going to do and what you should do, and you're going to do this, and if we set up this way, this is what you're going to have to do. That type thing. But no, because after a while, you know, you were just short, particularly in the rifle companies. And so if you were smart, because if they do their job, well, it would be better for you or your other people in our particular platoon.
Yeah.
And for the most part, you know, the old Repo depots were in England. Most of them came directly over from England. And they were probably as apprehensive, more so obviously, than we were.
What steps did you take to calm them down?
Well, if we had, for instance, if we had a couple days or something and we're in the same place, we'd depending on who came in or what position they were supposed to be, we'd get them together and say, now, your job is, if we say, if it's say it's an ammo bearer, I said, you're supposed to have 12 rounds ready to go at all times or stuff like that. And if the word comes, you're gonna make a fire, this is what you do. And just general, and introduce them to everybody so that everybody knew what their names were. And
I guess kept them busy and maybe kept it very functional, very military.
If you're carrying a carbine, or if you keep that thing clean, and then if we're have a little extra time and sometimes clean it, because you know if you fire and you get a misfire, that doesn't do you any good. Of course, we all by that time had the automatic rifles. Answer your question direct, just general stuff to work them into the operation.
Yeah. The perception or the myth is that the outsiders, the new guys, were there was an emotional barrier, and you didn't want to get too attached to them.
Well, yeah, I've had a lot of people talk about that, and I guess I never did. In a smaller operation like we had, well, I can remember 2 or 3 times when we lost, like I tell you, the little machine gunner. We called him Chief. He was an Indian, purebred Indian. So everybody had a name. We had Chief, we had Jew, we had Dago, we had, oh, I don't remember what I started. Nobody objected, that's just the nickname. And they called me Ike, because that's what I did in college. But I think a lot of people got more attached to than I did, looking back over the whole thing.
Yeah.
But there again, you know, I left in December, and some of those guys were clear 4 more months, and they saw a lot of combat.
Yeah. And that's an even stronger bond when by the time the war ended.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing. Like, I guess my best friend in there went all the way through. And of course, and I guess one of the, you know, call it a nice thing, but we had fellows that got hit but came back. Wasn't bad enough to go to the hospital, but they'd be out for maybe a couple of weeks with, maybe say a bullet through the arm or something, and they'd be bandaged up or something, and they'd send them back.
Yeah.
And they would do fine. And of course, you've heard all kinds of stories about guys that got hit and just kept on going.
They just found a way to keep.
It's crazy,
fighting.
yeah.
When you look back to 67 years ago, back to 1944, is there any memory, anything that comes to mind?
Oh, I guess not one over the other. No. We had, or I did, we had a lot of good times too. Like one in Carson, Colorado, and Colorado Springs, beautiful area. And when we had time off, there were a lot of things to do and so forth. And then you worked hard during the week. I suppose that since our outfit started in October and really didn't get much of a reprieve until Thanksgiving Day.
That's a lot of time in the line.
Yeah. Now, you know, you'd have 2 or 3 days, like we did in Indian. We were there for 3 or 4 days, I guess, as I recall, before we made that attack. But you could be in the line and just be in a hole or be in a house somewhere. But everybody seemed to get along. You just, I guess. There again, the rifle platoons did did practically all the scouting. And occasionally we'd have to send a person, but if we did that, then we didn't have anybody to do it, like run a mortar or run a machine gun.
Yeah.
So riflemen took it in chin a lot more than we would.
You have a lot of respect.
Our particular deal.
Yeah. You have a lot of respect for those guys.
Yep.
Toting the M1 Grand. Do you have any final thoughts for us with regards to duty or your service?
Well, as I said, somebody that interviewers thing, I just feel so fortunate. See, I was recalled to Japan. I mean, recalled to the Korean deal. And that didn't work out, but again, I came back. I guess not. I didn't have any shell shock, they would say, or no, I really haven't. As I've told so many people, I just feel so fortunate. You know, I traveled and traveled my states of Ohio and so forth, and 40,000 miles, never had a accident, and went all through and then went to Japan, and it's, you know, I don't know why they chose me to lead this interview, because like Elmer Cox, there's a lot of people that had a lot more terrible deals than I did. I mean, I just was lucky.
But there are many men who would say the same thing, who would look at your service. You fought in the ETO, you were right up on the rifle line, you did suffer wounds, you saw combat. And there were many men who would feel that they had it easy and you had it hard. Would you?
No, somebody, you know, if the quartermaster didn't get their job done and get his stuff, like our supply sergeant, I guess one of the biggest bitches I heard from some of the infantrymen, including one right here in Muncie, is that the headquarters company and guys always got a first look at the meat and beans before it got up to us, and there was always something else in the cans, you know. But you had all kind of crazy stuff, but when it came down to it, get the job done. Horsing around you could do when you wouldn't bother anything, but I guess what the guy says, I had a wonderful experience, but I wouldn't want to do it again.
I can sympathize, but you did do it.
Yeah.
And you're here to, I guess, pass that knowledge on to historians and students who may see this interview 50 years from now. And is there any particular message you would have for future generations?
Oh dear. You know, my boys have turned out so well, and I really didn't have a hell of a lot to do with it. My wife certainly did, and their mother certainly did. And I don't know. I would say be true to yourself, to your friends, and to your family, and do the best you can on your job, and be loyal to those who have been loyal to you.
Good advice.
I have a grandson right now that's changing jobs, and I guess he says, better pay. And I said, well, that's just great, but be sure and be loyal to them if they're good enough to come after you. And they did. They came after him. Do your job well for them so you can, so they'll be happy that they hired you.
Yeah.
But you know, I'm no philosopher. I'm just an old-time furniture salesman.
Well, Jack, have I forgotten anything?
Oh,
today?
Heavens, no. I probably rattled on more than I should.
No, sir. No, sir. Well,
As I said, and I appreciate what you're doing, and I know there's a lot of people out there could probably do it, but give you more information than I have, because some of the Marines, particularly in Japan, some of those guys, as I used to tell, I couldn't have lasted 5 minutes over there between the bugs and the stuff that some of those guys went through, and because all those islands, just island after island. And my wife passed away, oh gosh, almost 10 years ago. So I'm remarried, and her husband was on an LST in the Navy. And he said, you know, we dropped those Marines off on the shore and throw that thing in reverse, and we just couldn't hardly wait to get out of there because we could see them dying in front of us from whatever the Japanese threw at them. From that standpoint, and of course it was a whole different culture. I mean, like your question, whether German people were smart enough that many soldiers, I mean, if they were beat, they were beat, other than the SS guys. But Japan, no. It was just, anyway, there again, I got to go to Germany, or I got to go to Europe, and I didn't have to go to Japan.
Yeah. Well, we spoke with, yesterday, we spoke with a Marine veteran, Fred Glancy, who was in the third wave at Iwo Jima.
Oh, I know who he is.
Yeah. And it was a good conversation. And Fred, much like yourself, said the same thing. I don't think I'm special. I don't think I did anything special. I just did my duty.
Well, that's...
And I can't imagine being in his shoes or your shoes.
Oh. Yeah, it's kind of like when I got sent to Infantry Basic. You know, 18 years old, 19 years old, I was in the infantry. And so were a lot of other people with us. And Army was the Army, you know, you had problems wherever you went. And we had, as far as I can recall, we had pretty good foremen, I mean, pretty good officers, both in training and in the division. And when I was in school, of course, that little course that I took in France, all those guys had been in combat. Well, of course, all of us had been in combat. And that's what made them, that's why they wasn't much learning to do.
Yeah. And that's why you were there.
Yeah.
You were going to see
I
more.
guess, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember you did go have to, what they call that, some kind of a board. And they said, well, why do you want to be an officer? And I didn't answer, and this one guy said, well, because you get more money. And I said, well, maybe that's true. Oh, one more story about Omar Bradley.
Oh, yes.
We didn't have any clothes. No, so they finally came through with, I think it was $150 clothing allowance. Well, there was a shoe store, this is in Germany, there was a shoe store in Frankfurt. And I said, well, let's go in there and we can get some, we had boots, but we didn't have any, you know, flat shoes like this. Yeah. So there's 3 of us went in and 2 of us went in the shoe store. And I'm sitting here just like this, and chairs forward, and his kid was out in front, and he was acting crazy like this and doing this and then. So I thought, what the hell's the matter with him? Anyway, I don't know if I looked or somebody said, I was sitting right next to Omar Bradley. He was getting a pair of shoes. So that's what he was trying to tell us, that Bradley was in there.
Did you say anything to the general?
I suppose, I don't remember, I don't recall. Maybe I just got up and left, I don't remember.
Well, if he saw the Timberwolf patch on your shoulder, he would have said good things.
Yeah, let's see, I can't remember which patch that was on, or which side that was on. Or we probably didn't have any. I probably didn't have any because, as I said, we were.
You'd already been reassigned?
Well, I was, we weren't even without any kind of an outfit.
Yeah.
In fact, when I was in the hospital, I lost everything. We arrived with, I didn't have anything. So I started to get toothbrushes and shaving stuff, and this one fella gave me a used tank. You remember what they used to take, a tank jacket? They had the nicest jackets. Well, he had one and he gave it to me. So in a period of 3-4 months in the hospital, I accumulated, you know, clothes and toiletries and stuff. So here I go back to Paris on the way to Fontainebleau, and I had this bag. So in the train station, I had to go to the men's room. So we left our bag there, came back, and some Frenchman had stolen, lost everything again. I didn't have anything but the clothes on my back.
Always keep your bag with you.
Yeah. Crazy.
Well, Jack, thank you very much for coming in
Well, you're
and talking with us. I appreciate it. I hope I haven't stumbled too much over my questions.
Well, I hope I haven't been too long-winded.
No, sir. No, sir. Thank you very much. And
Yeah.
on behalf of WIPB, I thank you for your service.